listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Today, we're going to talk about security and loss prevention, which is a huge issue always for all retailers, but particularly in the last few years, there's been way more concerns related to the escalation of what's going on in stores, plus some of the other issues related to loss prevention. So today, to take us through this conversation, I want to welcome Amber Bradley, who is the founder and owner of Calibration Group, and she also has a long history in loss prevention, including TalkLP.com, a podcast specifically devoted to loss prevention. So thanks for joining us today, Amber.
Yeah, great to be here, Jeff. Thanks so much.
So loss prevention is basically a fancy way of saying theft. Do you want to take us through just an overview of the kinds of things that you look at? I know you're very involved in loss prevention over the last decade plus. Take us through some of the things that you look at and what you're most curious about now, and then we'll dive into some issues.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So thanks for saying decade plus, right? Because it's really been so much longer than that. But I am really fortunate in the role that I have is to be an observer of the loss prevention space and journalist and that kind of thing, and podcast host, which is so much fun interviewing loss prevention and asset protection executives. So it's really interesting, loss prevention has become such an evolved profession, right? So back in the day, it really was synonymous with theft. And then fast forward to really the loss prevention executive these days having a seat at that C-suite table, really focused on not only just theft, both internal and external, but also shrink and understanding waste and loss and profitability, operational issues, all of these things. Then you get into 2020, which is really more the loss prevention professional having to be pulled into all types of pandemic conversations and safety really being evolved into their role, whether it was or not to begin with, which is incredible, right? So the LP executive these days has so many things on their plate, including theft, organized retail crime, and most importantly, with, to our discussion today, safety of employees and customers.
So at the NAC show, you led one of the top-rated education sessions that was focused on de-escalating situations in stores. And I thought that's probably a good place to start since you mentioned the pandemic. I think what we've seen since the pandemic is in 2020, that plus all the other things where you're either on this side or that side of an issue. And to a certain extent, it feels like people forgot how to be people. But that is manifesting itself in stores. And there's behavior that I think 5 years ago, people would say that's not cool, that's not acceptable. And it seems like now that is much more prevalent. And that was a big focus of your education session at the NAC show.
Yeah, we even, showed some video clips of adults acting like children. I mean, who knew that you'd have someone at your counter just tossing product from their cart or the countertop because you wouldn't have a mask on, right? I mean, I think people through this pandemic, and we've seen it through research and a bunch of experts in, social stressors, have talked about the fact that coming out of a pandemic, most people are a few conversations from crazy, right? I mean, you're talking about everyone's stress level has just been to the max for a long period of time at this point. And then you incorporate some of the economic issues that people are facing today, such as inflation. And then you've got the stress of your kids are at home. Are they going back to school? Are you going to have to vaccinate them? All of these things, I think, turned that customer-employee interaction into a very sensitive situation, which typically hasn't been the case. Everybody's got a little less patience these days. And in the de-escalation session at NACS, I mean, we really talked with some amazing experts from across the board about how do you make sure your employees can understand that sensitivity, right? Which is really more of an art than a science.
And that goes back to starting to have the discussion, the customer's not always right. Sometimes a customer needs to be escorted out of the store. And we heard this in other sessions at the NAC show. Scott Stratton was talking about how you got to look out for your people because they are there every day and you got to take the the customers who are a problem outside and just say, hey, you're not welcome here anymore. But there's also the de-escalation elements where somebody comes in and they're already hot. And it can create a situation that is not just unpleasant, but it also can be dangerous in a store. And Don Rhodes spoke in a general session. He was talking about a couple of years ago, people would come in with the mask mandates. He was in the Pacific Northwest, and he wanted to protect his customers or his employees. So he put a simple sign up that says, this is not our choice. This is the law. And if you have a question about this, here's my cell phone number. Call me. Don't talk to the clerk. And he said he had some productive conversations. He said he also had some, shall we say, unproductive conversations with people. But what is the whole? I know it sounds like we're joking because we're not. But then when you talk about people that come in and they're one or two degrees away from crazy, or they're throwing stuff, and it's where we talk about it jokingly. It's just kind of to take down just kind of the stress of normal situations like this, because it is a problem. But when you look at issues of de-escalating, what are the things that you look at in terms of, or the things that you discuss? How do you disrupt that pattern of somebody coming in hot and taking them to a better place?
Yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, these organizations are dealing with not only a constrained labor force, right? But, even in the C-store environment, you don't have 30 people on staff at any given moment, right? You're lucky if you've got 2, maybe. So, training has evolved. And if you're thinking about training as, okay, we're going to put them through a couple hours when we first hire them, pat them on the back and send them on their way, you're kind of missing the boat, because that's not going to help your employees de-escalate a situation, because in fact, it's complicated. These are human beings that everybody's feeling all of this stress, and you have no idea what they just left walking into your store, right? So the training piece has definitely evolved to be more empathetic in nature, more artful than just, okay, take the card, process it through the point of sale, hand them back the card, right? It's more like, okay, what do you do in this whole behavior role play? That was a huge theme in the NAC session was, okay, if you're not training to doing some sort of role play, whether that's in a video or in person, you're doing your employees a disservice, because they do need that muscle memory when someone comes in irate. What are the steps to take to keep yourself safe, of course, but also try to de-escalate the situation, which, we've talked to psychologists and all of this stuff, knowing that, de-escalating is a complex thing, especially if you're dealing with someone who's mentally ill, which, some of those videos we showed at NACS seem like that might be the case. But I would say training is a huge key, but you have to rethink how you're training your people.
And talking earlier, I said people forgot how to be human. Humans forgot how to be humans over the last couple of years with the pandemic. But that almost seems to be exactly what you're saying is we need to model human behavior so that everyone sees, oh, that isn't, you don't use it as kind of a parent saying, don't do that, but it's more like model the behavior that you want to see. Unfortunately, it has to be that way. And then you're more likely to see it. What were some of your takeaways going through that session? And again, you've been active in our industry for quite a few years. Did you learn anything new about how our industry looks at de-escalating situations, or things that we ought to look further at?
Yeah, I mean, I think years ago, it was just what you said. The customer was always right. And then the organization's taking more of a hard stance with the employee to say, well, you should have given them the burger. You should have given them whatever they're asking for. Now it's just a totally different thing, especially when you're dealing with employee safety and trying to understand things can escalate so quickly, especially everyone under all this stress. So I would say one of the things that I learned from my panelists in that next session was the importance of role play that we talked about, but not just giving them, hey, make sure that they feel good walking out the door, or it's really telling them the phrases, right? I mean, it's that perfect example of the whole just say no to drugs, right? Which is a great slogan. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with teenagers, you have to tell them, here's some things to actually say, right? And I think this is a perfect example when you're thinking about the evolution of training, is that you don't just put something up on your wall that says, see something, say something. You have to tell them, what does it look like, right? I mean, we're going through the airport and you hear that overhead thing like, report human trafficking. See something, so you're like, okay, what does that look like, right? What am I even looking for? So the artful role play of that training piece and reiterating those things on a consistent basis, our folks on the panel talked about how important that is. It's just necessary to say, give them, I'm so sorry that you're feeling this way. I understand. I mean, there's a whole role play of the whole empathy thing that would hopefully de-escalate a situation. And then also training to understand, when is it not possible? When is the customer not right? You have to call some authorities, call your manager, get someone else involved in the situation for your own safety, which is also a very important point to train.
And as we're dealing with a labor shortage, of course, the more you have incidents in stores, makes it more difficult to keep labor. And it also, of course, makes it more difficult to get in customers to go to your store if, there's incidents there. So, this is a big issue, and it feels like just the last couple of years it has gotten bigger. Now, looking at just a couple elements of loss prevention, we'll start at the lower end, if you will, in terms of violence, is shoplifting. You had raised that earlier. We're in inflationary times. Inflation's very high. Are you hearing more about shoplifting, and what does it look like? I know there's the flash mobs, flash robs, that are a big deal in some retail environments. If you can steal a bunch of designer jeans or something like that and resell it. With convenience stores, shoplifting tends to, if you're shoplifting something to resell, it has to be highly fungible. It has to be something like cigarettes or something that you get a high resale on. Although, from what I understand, a lot of the resale now is taking place on the internet. It's not somebody selling it on blanket. It's somebody buying these items and then going online and reselling them, because whatever you're selling for is you're going to make more of a margin because you got it for free. What are some of the elements that are coming out in inflationary times with shoplifting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that there are probably some cases, right, where people are having hard times financially due to the price of everything. And so they may be going into a store and trying to, push out their groceries in a cart or something like that. I think the shoplifting piece is definitely there, definitely has always been there, and potentially would be increasing now. But I think the other part of this coin is the organized retail crime part, which is really what you were referring to. And probably any loss prevention executive listening to this would say, yes, ORC is not shoplifting, which they definitely make a huge distinction about. But the inflationary times do drive some of this ORC that we're seeing, because if you kind of mesh those two ideas together, right, the mom that can't afford the high prices in the grocery store may be pushed to that online marketplace, right? So, which this is where all of these organized retail crime folks are selling their fenced goods that they're dealing with. So, it's definitely, organized retail crime is massively increasing, has been there, right? And has been, misnamed shoplifting for many, many years. When you have career criminals going in specifically to do what you said, steal those designer jeans and then sell them somewhere else, or whether it's Tide Pods or health and beauty items from a grocery store, certainly. So that's definitely a huge piece of it. We just did a podcast with Raul Aguilar, the Homeland Security Investigations Deputy Assistant Director, on Monday, who talks about what Homeland Security Investigations is doing to help combat organized retail crime. And there's some major retailers working with them, CVS, Walgreens, the Coalition of Law Enforcement and Retail, CLEAR. So there's so many organizations led by some amazing retailers that are combating this organized retail crime. But from a C-store perspective, you're right. I mean, They're not selling designer jeans. They're not selling Tide Pods. But what's really interesting is Talk LP engages in some executive conversations of hot topics. We recently did one on fuel theft, and it's definitely a bigger deal in the organized retail crime space than I ever dreamt. And I learned a lot from the executives from 7-Eleven and Racetrack and Wawa, all these folks taking part in the conversation that, you have trucks pulling up, they're manipulating the fuel pump in some manner, and they have huge cells in those cars, taking in all of this fuel, and they have tripped, the meter to say that it's 1 gallon versus 1,500 gallons, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually shocked at, all of the different pieces of organized retail crime that are impacting C-stores.
Yeah, and that's an example where hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars, can be stole, and that has a very high resale value. Now, what we always stress to the general public is that also creates a very dangerous environment. This is not a Robin Hood crime, and
Right.
It creates a dangerous environment, not at the gas station necessarily, but anywhere that truck is going, because that is not something that's designed for safety. It is designed for quick fill up and escape.
Right.
And having that truck driving down a road, having that truck go through a tunnel, God forbid, is terrifying when you think about it. And having it parked in your backyard or wherever it is, however they unload this fuel. And my understanding is most of this fuel is unloaded to fleets. Somebody that can immediately take it all. You don't want to put a sign up in front of your house that says 10 gallons of fuel.
Right.
Makes you a little obvious as a target. But so it is something that when there's an opportunity, when there's an imbalance in prices, and when there's an ability to resale, organized retail crime is a growing problem. Whether or not you think about it in our stores, and our stores are largely thought of as impulse. So somebody's not going to steal a candy bar because of need. They may steal a whole bunch of them because they think they can make money off of it, though.
Yeah. And these people, with the fuel theft, I mean, we heard some very terrifying stories of employees that saw what was going on and wanted to stop these people, right? Which goes back to training to say, these are very dangerous people,
Mm-hmm.
So another point to the training piece to say, your folks shouldn't be trying to stop these folks instead of just calling the authorities.
And that seems like a good transition to just to finish our conversation today, before our next conversation, of course, to talk about, you talked about raising the likelihood of violence and just violence in stores. That fits into the de-escalation, because if you can de-escalate a situation, obviously it's less likely to happen. Violence is less likely to happen. And in some of the tips that need to be followed to ensure that something doesn't go from a lower level theft or crime to something that is a higher level of violence. Any broad trends that you're seeing out there that we need to pay more attention to?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think what I've observed is loss prevention executives, really looking at, number one, safety of their employees and the customers. And to do that, they're really thinking about ways to engage law enforcement more, because of course, with everything going on in that area of society, it's difficult. They're strapped with time, they're strapped with labor, the response time is slow. So there's a couple things that are pretty fluffy suggestions, right? Which is making sure that you're providing discounts, free food, get the cop car out there, welcoming them in. Maybe it's a coffee with the cop morning or something like that to really reach out to your local law enforcement representatives there in your local area so they know your name, they know your organization. I mean, those are pretty fluffy suggestions, but work is the thing, right? Simple is sometimes best.
Yeah.
So some other things, especially if you're dealing with upcoming elections, right? We're going to see the midterms. And even looking forward to the next presidential election, you have to be aware of your neighborhood, right? What's going on locally. So maybe you need to be the first to open, first to close, right? So that way you're keeping those employees a little safer, considering what may be going on, monitoring social media to understand, the temperament in your neighborhood, which I think is really important, especially when you're dealing with political unrest, social unrest, all of these things that seem to be cropping up more and more over the last couple of years. But the other thing is investing in technology. I mean, I know sometimes that's a heavy lift when you're talking about razor thin margins, but CCTV, having potentially virtual guards, remote monitoring, where you have someone else in such a low labor environment, someone that's maybe there when they leave monitoring, right? You have companies out there that can just remote in when they're leaving to make sure that they're safe, right? And then, maybe it's a physical guard situation. But a lot of people are having a lot of success utilizing technology. I mean, there's so many things out there that are in that good, better, best that it doesn't always have to break the bank.
Yeah, and of course, there's low cost things, which is just visibility and lighting, keeping cash on hand and other things on hand to a minimum to make your store less desirable as a target. And then, as you said, good, better, best. What do you need to address what is going on in your community? And right now, everything's going on in the community. As you mentioned, the mental health, all these other issues. When convenience stores are in every community in the country, they reflect every community in the country. So you attract people of all types, and with more prevalence of people who are on edge or people who are mentally ill, it's time to really look at the playbook for loss prevention and see where do you need things that are up to date, because it is trying times for a lot of people, and that could manifest itself in your stores.
Yeah, one of the things I thought of really quickly when you were talking is I'm aware of one major C-store chain. I won't say the name, but they have tested. They had actually some stores in a rough neighborhood. They have some loitering going on and things like that. So they actually tested playing different types of music or different tones outside. I'm sure I'm not telling you anything that is new, but I found it fascinating, right? To test this type of technology that's playing a certain tone that's just people can't. If you're in there to get gas and do good things for the C-store, great. But if you're in there to just stand around and cause problems, you can't take the sound. And so you're out of there. So you think about what you said, there's low cost solutions to that. I found that to be fascinating. It was working.
Yeah, and I don't want to give away, we won't give away the store name, but I thought the artist was Barry Manilow for some reason.
Yeah.
So,
which I'm a big Barry Manilow fan, to be honest. So I don't know if it would work for me, but others, people just couldn't take it.
Yeah, but maybe At the Copa 3 times through might prove a little too much for anyone.
It might.
But no, exactly. The idea that it just, it is no longer a place where you want to hang out because it's not, say, the type of sound you want to hear. I've also heard about, I think it's called mosquito or something like that for younger people. When you age out a little, you don't hear the same sounds, but younger people hear different sounds, and just putting some sort of annoying sound that only young ears can hear, those teens or lower, can also address some of the issues around loitering. And that's another low cost.
And super creative, right? I mean, the loss prevention folks are really getting creative out there.
And it's a really good community. And looking at the stuff that you've done with TalkLP.com, your work on various other elements of loss prevention and D&D Daily?
Yes. Yeah, they're a good partner of ours.
So before we leave today, can you just kind of give people a sense of where they can find out more about loss prevention before the next time we talk?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's like I paid you to ask me. So
But you didn't.
I didn't, but I did not. So talklp.com, as you said, I mean, we've got a great website, but more importantly, we have an app, right, that you can find on any, wherever you get your favorite apps. But what's cool about this, though, Jeff, is that it's the only app that has loss prevention breaking news continuously updating throughout the day, right? We don't just pull, it's constantly updating. So if you need to know something that's going on, it's in the app. It also has research, podcasts, of course, which are my favorite, and jobs. We also have the D&D Daily right in the palm of your hand. So it's a very critical app for the loss prevention professional for sure. And then we also do a Apex event, which is Asset Protection Executive Exchange. We do them in person Next one's September of 2023 in Nashville. But we also do some virtual leadership only conversations like the fuel theft one I mentioned. So lots of ways to get involved with us. If you're in loss prevention or not, right? Maybe you don't have a loss prevention person, we have resources for you to help you, because not all C-stores, have a loss prevention representative. And so we're happy to help and try to give you resources in the palm of your hand.
Well, again, Amber, loss prevention is always been a huge issue. It is a bigger issue now. So thanks for taking some time with us today. And thank you all for joining us on Convenience Matters.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Jeff.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.